So I want to thank you all so much for joining us for our September Wolfpack Wellness Power Lunch series. This is a very timely talk, something that I think all of us have been wondering about, thinking about, trying to wrap our heads around what 2020 is and how do we create a space that we can move forward together when often it feels like it's a lot of pull and tug in terms of the way that society is right now. And so I wanted to bring forward this talk as an opportunity for us to create a space where we can really talk about peace and moving forward together. And so, as you all, most of you all may know, at NC State, we recognize 6 elements of wellness, and one of those elements of wellness is community well-being. And when we talk about community well-being, we really are highlighting the need to foster a safe and supportive environment for all. And as we know, 2020 has highlighted a lot of disparities in that safety and supportive environment for everyone. And so we wanted to highlight what strategies and tips and tools can we use moving forward in our lives to ensure that we are doing the best job that we can to make the Wolfpack community as open arms and embracing as we can, no matter where our position lies. If we're faculty, staff, if we have some alumni that might be on the call today, some affiliates of NC State that might be on the call today. So no matter what your lane is or what area you are in, we want to make sure that we are understanding how do we shape peace and how do we move forward together. And so I thought, wow, this is a great talk. This is something that could benefit all. Who can we pull in? And so I thought Dr. Rupert Nacoste might be one of the best folks to bring forward about this discussion and how we can really shape this conversation and how we can move forward together. And so I'd like to read his bio as we get started. And so pardon me while I'm pulling it up really quickly. I don't want to do too many things at one time. But Dr. Nacoste is an author and an alumni distinguished undergraduate professor in the psychology department here at North Carolina State University. And many of you are familiar with Dr. Nacoste and have seen him in a variety of settings, whether that is a talk that he's done previously or whether that is something that you might have heard of, maybe you've heard of his books, etc. And so with this talk, we want to really outline strategies that we can use to move forward together. And when I spoke with Dr. Nacoste, our first call when we were setting this up, we were saying how this conversation comes up a lot in conversations with his faculty coworkers, how this conversation is something that is one that is a little harder to get into, but one that we know has the greatest impact. We are in the business of students, working with students, and ultimately the classroom experience is one of the first places that our students get to shape that experience of what community well-being means and how we can impact that. And so let's go ahead and read his bio. I apologize. I had all of this laid out. Here we go. Now we're cooking, y'all. Stay with me. So Dr. Nacoste comes to us from the Bayou in Louisiana. Again, he's an alumni distinguished undergraduate professor in psychology. During his time, he served in the Navy from 72 to 76, and he dealt with a lot of racial issues while he was in the Navy. He worked in the Department of Defense, that was who trained him, to be a facilitator in racial dialogues. And so this is something that he wants to bring into the work that he does bring into the work that he does in his classroom, but then also across campus. He has worked as a scholar activist, and really working on interpersonal and intergroup relationships. I'm most excited to read his book, Taking on Diversity, How We Can Move from Anxiety to Respect. And that was something that came up during our first call. But he also has a new book that just came out, and it's To Live Woke, Thoughts to Carry Our Struggle to Save the Soul of America. And so this is going to be, we get to sample a piece of this for today's talk. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Nacoste. Let's see, can we see him on the call? Let's see. Uh-oh. Dr. Nacoste, are you out there?
I'm here.
All right,
I'm here.
now we're cooking. I told you it wouldn't be Zoom if it didn't give us some issues.
That's
So
right.
I have an overview, and now I'm going to turn the mic over to you, Dr. Nacoste.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you to the NCSU Wellness Program for setting up this power lunch that allows me to talk with you, talk with your community members about the interpersonal intergroup issues we are struggling with as a nation, and that impact every one of us and the students we interact with. I have the long view. I've been working on interpersonal intergroup issues since my time in the United States Navy, 1972 to 1976. I do indeed have the long view. The co-occurrence of COVID-19 social isolation and the very public, hideous murder of Mr. George Floyd has created what I've been calling a COVID-19 woke effect. America has been stunned into a new awareness of the sometimes brutal intergroup dynamics that have been a constant in the lives of African Americans. Cutting across all the group identities of American culture, that new startled awareness has activated a hunger to understand and to do something to help end racism. That is where I and my concept of neodiversity can help people find productive ways of thinking and acting in this new intergroup context. My new book, To Live Woke, is centered on the concept of neodiversity, with stories from my life and my teaching at North Carolina State University. To Live Woke is set up in 46 short essay chapters. I wrote and crafted it that way because there are so many us versus them topics that connect to our nation's neodiversity situation. I also put it together in small bits to give the reader psychological space to pause in, to reflect and process these topics that we all know cause tension. Yes, we must rid our country of systems of racism, sexism, heterosexism, religionism, all those systems of bigotry. But that is not all we must do. We must also work on interpersonal bigotry in our everyday lives. We also should be talking about addressing and confronting bigotry that occurs in our everyday social interactions. Am I hearing a reverberation, or is this all right? In my book, To Live Woke, I say it this way. Some of the same people who call out somebody else for being a racist turn right around and engage in gender bigotry, or engage in bigotry towards people with certain bodily conditions by avoiding those people, or engage in bigotry based on sexual orientation through language use, that's so gay, or engage in bigotry toward people with mental health conditions, saying out loud that someone is a retard. Focusing on racism in a person is a dodge. It's a quick move to leave out all the other forms of bigotry in our society. We imply that if we can just stop people from being racist, stop people from seeing color, then that would solve all the problems of human prejudice in our society. No, it would not. When it comes to bigotry aimed at people with mental health conditions, we have a lot of work to do. Here is chapter 17 from my book, To Live Woke. Chapter 17, how a mental health condition, how a mental health revealed becomes a trust betrayed by bigotry. Have you ever considered using mental health condition as an example of neodiversity? As other students left the lecture hall, a white female student was asking me that question at the end of the lecture day of my interdependence and race course. Not really, I said. Going on, I said, as you've seen, I do, of course, consider that mental health condition can activate neodiversity anxieties, but I am not qualified to talk about features of any particular mental health condition. That's not what I mean, she said. I mean how learning someone has a mental health condition can push an in-group, out-group feeling into a relationship. This was a very sophisticated question. Taking her seriously, I told her that I could not see a way to include that idea in our class in the remaining lectures, but would think about it. Truth is, I was resistant to taking this on in lecture. After all, I had never done so before. Not only that, but I wasn't sure where it would fit in my lecture scheme, nor whether it was important enough to take on. My student thanked me for talking, left, and went on with the rest of her day. I turned to my teaching assistants. Undergraduates as teaching assistants is one of my innovations for teaching my one-of-its-kind interdependence and race course. That course is very challenging because it digs into a topic that is so highly volatile in America, neodiversity. Neodiversity is the modern interpersonal situation of America, where we all have to encounter and interact with people not like us on some group dimension: gender identity, religion, bodily condition, race, mental health condition, ethnicity, sexual orientation. A central concern of the course is the why and how neodiversity can create anxiety during a social interaction and cause interpersonal problems. Spring 2019, when I asked my teaching assistants for their thoughts about the mental health condition question, both became pensive. Catherine, a self-described strong Southern white woman from Mount Airy, North Carolina, and Zaire, a tall, dark-skinned African-American male from the state of New York and a self-described introvert, each hesitated to think about the question. Eventually, each in their own way said they thought this was important to include in a lecture somewhere. Lo and behold, our conversation reminded me of a paper written by a student in an earlier semester. Suddenly, I could see where to put the potential interpersonal dynamics of a mental health condition reveal into one of my lectures. Through that conversation with my teaching assistant and my remembering a particular student's story, I had found a way and a place to talk about the potential neodiversity anxiety intergroup dynamics of a mental health condition reveal. I would talk about the potential dynamics of a mental health reveal moment in one of the upcoming lectures on language communities. Language communities as a topic has to do with how we talk to each other from the standpoint of having different group experiences and language norms. One of the keys to productive interpersonal and intergroup dialogues is what social psychologists call partner responsiveness, engaging in honest self-disclosure and receiving from your interaction partner a response that seems to show understanding, validation, and caring. To develop healthy relationships, this partner responsiveness must be mutual. Turns out, one of the challenges of neodiversity is to interact with people not like you and respond to those people, person's stories with interpersonal respect and with partner responsiveness. Too often today, in neodiversity interactions, trapped inside their own language community, people respond with culture-centric negative social judgments. My group's way is the only way. Now I had a way to talk about the moment of a mental health condition reveal and show how that moment could become an in-group, out-group moment. You see, the semester before, one of my students had written their story of such a moment going bad. She wrote, "In the fall of my freshman year of college, I was severely depressed. That December, I made an attempt on my life. The week I returned home from the emergency room, my best friend, B, drove over to hang out with me since my mother didn't exactly trust me to leave the house or be left alone at the time. He knew the gist of what had happened, but upon arriving to my house, I explained the situation further." Let me interrupt the story here to say this. Let us note here that this is an incredibly intimate, honest self-disclosure. Our writer did so by trusting her best friend. Continuing with her story, she wrote, "When I had finally gotten my story out to the one person I trusted more than anyone, he repetitively told me how disappointed he was in me. He said that my decision was selfish and stupid and that nothing in life could be so terrible. He did not understand my situation or my depression. Lucky for him, he had never suffered from intense trauma or a mental health disorder. I tried to explain that there was a chemical imbalance in my brain, appealed to the science side of things. I thought science couldn't possibly be seen as subjective. I became emotional, and upon realizing how much he had upset me, he apologized. We watched the movie and chose not to discuss it anymore." Not only was there no partner responsiveness from her best friend, his reaction to her mental health reveal was interpersonally brutal and demeaning. That had a powerful effect on our writer. Going on with her story, she describes the personal effect of this heartless interpersonal interaction with a friend. She said this: "The scars on my left arm serve as a constant reminder of the lack of understanding of mental health disorders. After this reaction, I became closed off about what had happened. I was hurt by my friend's reaction and did not want to subject myself to that kind of scolding again. I knew that it was not my fault and that I did not have a reason to be embarrassed, but I chose not to share my story with others because I was unsure of how to approach the situation in a way that could help others learn about mental health." In a moment of trusting vulnerability, this young person struggling with a mental health condition found themselves face to face with hibernating bigotry. Hibernating bigotry is bigotry that sleeps until the right stimulus comes along to wake it up, and then it awakens with a roar. He said that my decision was selfish and stupid, and that nothing in life could be so terrible. Today, in a neurodiverse interaction, too often people respond with culture-centric negative social judgments that stop communication and relationship development and feelings of belongingness. When I use the story in lecture to talk about the challenge of mental health condition, neurodiversity, interpersonal interactions, my students went stiff and wide-eyed. In that newish lecture, I said, "You see, even a reveal of a mental health condition can activate an in-group, out-group dynamic, just in the same way as other neurodiversity, female to male, Muslim to Christian interaction moments can." What made it intergroup? Well, our writer says it this way: "He did not understand my situation or my depression. Lucky for him, he had never suffered from intense trauma or mental health or a mental health disorder." Immediately, my students recognized how this mental health condition reveal reaction was an intergroup dynamic. Also, with their nonverbal behavior, many of my students seem to be showing me and my teaching assistants that this was another one they had participated in sometime in their past, directly or indirectly. A feeling of guilt seemed to fill the lecture hall. In my 30-some years of teaching, I have learned to listen and take seriously my students' comments and concerns. Even when I resist at first, I give it thought. This time, with a push from my undergraduate teaching assistants, I revised the lecture. Doing so was educational for me, and most importantly, for my students. Now my students have a sense of how easily trust in a friend can be betrayed when it activates hibernating bigotry about mental health conditions. For a variety of reasons, mental health conditions, anxiety, suicidal thoughts are on the rise among young people. When those young people reach out for support from family and friends, the last thing they need or can cope with is for that interaction moment to become us versus them, and they find themselves berated by a friend for the fact that they are struggling. To be an ally requires first and foremost self-examination. No matter what, no matter who you are, no matter how you are trained, no matter how you are educated, you are not all right. You are not all right because of the way you were socialized to be part of this American culture. Somewhere during your socialization, you were given ideas about some group, maybe race, maybe religion, maybe sexual orientation, maybe. The poet W.H. Auden put it this way: evil is unspectacular and always human, shares our bed and eats at our own table. Evil is unspectacular, always human, shares our bed and eats at our own table. Whoever you are, to be an ally in your role requires genuine self-examination and acceptance of the fact that you are not all right when it comes to having to interact with all kinds of people. There are no innocent. That is why to be an ally requires first and foremost self-examination of your intergroup feelings on a lot of fronts. If you think I'm good when it comes to Black people, and then a Black transgender woman walks in as a client, will you really be all right? Have you thought that through? In To Live Woke, there are 2 chapters in which I offer tips for how to interact well in our neurodiverse world. Chapter 33 is Evoke the Forms, 9 tips to help you live woke. A shorter version of those tips is in chapter 44, Heralding Neurodiversity. In that chapter, I describe my interactions with first-year students at Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania. In those interactions, I put the 9 tips into 5 points for having productive social interactions. Those 5 points are these, and I always start with this one. Never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. I say again, never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. The Shippensburg students agreed with me that this was the most basic starting point. Why? Because as soon as you try to interact with a person as what you think they represent, oh, that turns out to be a stereotype. Never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. It is not going to go well. Point 2, go slow. Go slow. When I let those Shippensburg students know that my approach to all that is going on is an interpersonal approach, I informed them of one of the discoveries from social psychology about that has to do with social interaction. That discovery is this, about self-disclosures. Self-disclosures should come slowly, as if peeling an onion. Go slow. Self-disclosure should come slowly, as if peeling an onion. I just talked to my social psych course about this yesterday. Self-disclosure should come slowly, as if peeling an onion. That is to say, don't rush to try and get people to tell you things about themselves. Go slow. Give people room to talk. It's funny, as a professor, students come to my office, and I always start this way. I say, so tell me about yourself. And they start telling me about their major and where they're going to want to go to graduate school. I said, tell me about you, where you're from, parents, siblings, huh? Tell me about you. They're rushing. Go slow. Self-disclosure should come slowly, as if peeling an onion, and the corollary is self-disclosure should be asked for slowly, as if peeling an onion. Both those together adds up to my go slow rule for coping with neurodiversity anxiety. because anxiety will lift you off into a space where, whoo, go slow. Self-disclosure should come slowly as if peeling an onion. Self-disclosure should be asked for slowly as if peeling an onion. Point 3, live with anxiety. Live with anxiety. Too often, we talked about, that is we being the Shippensburg students and I, we talked about that we try to get past our anxiety. We try to get past it. And that's when we make it worse. We blurt out an inappropriate question like, what are you? That's an anxiety-driven question and so inappropriate. What are you? Live with the anxiety. You really have to ask this question in these kinds of moments. Why is it so important to you to identify a person's race and ethnicity right now? Why? What are you afraid of? Live with the anxiety. It's better to acknowledge to yourself you are feeling anxious and then remind yourself to follow rule 2, go slow. Go slow and live with the anxiety for a while. Look, some of you have met me in person, some not. Those of you who have met me in person know that I'm a big, giant black man. 6'3", broad shoulders. Yeah, when I walk in the room, people know it. Okay. So I have all kinds of stories where the anxiety has taken over. All I did was walk in the room and say, hi. The anxiety takes over, that neurodiversity anxiety. How am I supposed to interact? What should I say? And something comes flying out of somebody's mouth. And I'm looking at them like, So live with the anxiety, which means go slow and admit some things to yourself. That's part of the self-examination. You're feeling it. The other person doesn't know you're feeling that. Go slow. Point 4, agree to disagree. Meeting new people, we all know, means encountering people with different approaches to living life in the social world. For example, different political beliefs. Other people have their own, the reason for that is other people have their own social histories and experiences. From their experiences, those other people have already come to some of their opinions just as you have. Agree to disagree. I have to work my students through this because they believe they have to be right and they have to fix it in the moment. That never works. People have their own social experiences. I am a Louisiana Black Creole. There are things about the way I approach the world that you are not gonna fix. Trust me. Et toi, c'est bon, les bons anglais. You go down to the bayou and tell some Creole or Cajun they gotta speak English. You go ahead and do that. Remember, Cajuns and Creoles hunt gators, and they hunt them barehanded, and the gator loses. You do not want to do that. Agree to disagree. Agree to disagree without being competitive. The thing about us versus them, social psychologists know, is that there's always attached to it a competition motivation. Automatic categorization of people into groups with a tendency to compete. You got to drop that. I have to work my students through this. They want to change people in the moment, and I have to let them know they don't have that kind of power. Have a conversation. Be surprised. And expect to be surprised in this neurodiverse world we live in. That's point 4, agree to disagree. And then finally, point 5. These all add up to something. Learning conversations. Point 5 is learning conversations. Since on a campus like ours, since in life, we all will be meeting a mix of new people. Make your conversations learning conversations. How? A, avoid relying on stereotypes and stereotype questions. Neodiversity means the world is really complex. So the old way people used to do things was you go to a mixer and you shake somebody's hand and you say, so what do you do for a living? Uh, that's not always a good question. Not anymore. So avoid stereotype questions. Ask questions that open the interaction as opposed to close the interaction. Here are a couple that I offer my students. One is, so what keeps you busy? Notice there's no assumption in that, except maybe you're busy. What keeps you busy? Every time I've done that, it has opened up an interaction in ways I have been totally surprised by. Totally surprised by. What keeps you busy? The other one is, and this I got from a pastor, believe it or not, how do you spend your days? How do you spend your days? Again, no assumption at all. And it just opens the interaction. So, learning conversations. First, avoid relying on stereotypes and stereotype questions. B, go slow. Interact with intent to learn what the other person is willing to tell you. What they're willing to tell you, not what you think you need to know. C, live in the moment. Live in the moment. We live in a culture of rushing from one thing to the next, and that really gets in the way of social interactions, having real, authentic social interactions. Now, we're living in a real weird world right now, but there will be a day when we're back to having face-to-face interactions. Live in the moment. But even on Zoom, live in the moment. Breathe. Listen to what's going on. Sometimes my students on Zoom, it's not their fault. But, you know, they're in some little corner somewhere, but there's somebody right over here, and you can see them trying not to listen. Ooh, here's the funniest one. I was teasing them one day because I could see some things. And so I was teasing them, trying to make it interactive, even though it's Zoom. Oh. And one screen that had been blank went on, and this was this young guy who wanted me to know where he was. It went on, and I realized, wait, he's in a car, and it's moving. He wasn't driving. I would have had to say something about that. I laughed at the fact that he was in the car. He laughed, he waved at me, okay, and then he turned it off again. Okay, so there's a lot going on Zoom, but live in the moment. Live in the moment. Live with the anxiety, because the anxiety is telling you something. It's telling you something you need to work on. And back to D, agree to disagree. No one is going to change anybody in the moment. This is what I work my students on all the time. Nobody's going to change anybody in the moment. So agree to disagree without turning it into a horrible yelling match. Agree to disagree. I mean, people make all kinds of assumptions about me. I say I'm a Louisiana Creole. People really don't know what that means. Well, it means I have French base in my culture, African base in my culture, Native American base in my culture. It's a mix, Spanish in my culture, and Catholicism. I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church. In nomine Patri, Filii, Spiritus Sanctus. The Mass said in Latin. I was an altar boy. Okay. You think people expect that when they start talking to me? No, they don't. They think I know something about gospel music, and I don't. I've learned, but that's not how I grew up. So, the points I've made. Never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. Go slow. Live with the anxiety. Agree to disagree. And have learning conversations. And have learning conversations. This is how we begin to make progress at the interpersonal level. This is how we begin to create the kinds of spaces we want to have for ourselves and for our friends and for our students and our clients of all kinds.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nacoste, for reading, sharing with us, laughing with us. There were some beautiful comments there of laughter is the best medicine. A colleague wrote to me, I love that laugh. I said, I need that on repeat on days that I'm feeling down. That's a laugh that'll lift a spirit.
I have a story about that, which is crazy. So I've always laughed. I grew up, my father, I sound just like my father, big giant laugh, right? So I grew up in a household of people who laughed, so no matter the circumstances. We had things we could laugh about. I grew up in the Jim Crow South. We still laughed. We still ate well. We did all of that. So I never really, obviously nobody walked around thinking about how their laugh sounds necessarily. So when I was in graduate school, I was who I am. Big, loud, boisterous, yeah. Egghead, yes, but still me. When I finished, got my PhD, I left. Said goodbye to folks. Nice knowing you. I'm off to Michigan. 6 months later, I learned that one evening, and I remember the evening, they had come, some students and some friends of mine had come to my office to have a conversation, I thought. But what they were doing, they were hoping I would laugh, and they were recording it. And they did record it. And I was told that 6 months after I was gone, when things got bad, they would walk the hall with a recording of my voice, a recording of my laugh, and just play it. Okay, y'all was so crazy.
Oh my goodness, what a story. And I echo those students. That's a laugh that I want to keep around, especially on those days that we're feeling a little down. So let's see, we've got just a little bit of time left on the call today. And I want to kind of dive into some questions that I had, and we also have some questions that have popped through in the chat.
Sure.
But one thing that, as you were talking about your points of how this work is connected to the work that we do at NC State, especially around the elements of wellness. And I know we had this conversation the first time that we spoke, is that all of this is interactive, it's interconnected. One area influences and impacts another area for overall well-being, overall health. And those definitions of wellness, even the things that you talked about now that are hard topics, they still connect with overall well-being. And so it's pretty clear from your reading why the support of family and friends matters when it comes to mental illness. So how does this translate into personal spaces like school or work? Yeah, how does it translate?
Well, I could talk about campus.
Absolutely.
Our students, as you know, have a lot of contact with faculty. And something that we have not done well, we have not trained faculty to manage moments of interacting with students who are struggling on a variety of dimensions. I mean, when I have a student come to me very shyly to talk about their pronouns, that's a wellness issue. That's a belongingness issue. And I have learned how to manage that so that they feel welcome, so they feel like I'm going to protect them while you're in my class. But we've not trained faculty, and we've not trained some staff about how important those kinds of moments are. And it's moments that students are using to process this whole experience.
Yeah, absolutely right. And the work that I do when I work with students, a lot of times, you know, I work with them one-on-one in this health coaching setting, but we often say how we haven't gotten a chance to just sit with the fact that, yes, we're here for academic reasons. However, this is self-discovery, self-acceptance, self-love that is being built while they're in our hands, while we have them here. And I think how awesome it is that we've made progress. Now there's much progress to be made. However, looking back at my experience, some other folks' experience that I've connected with, these conversations, like you said, these learning conversations were not part of our upbringing, our schooling, any of those things. So now as adults, here we are trying to learn and process this kind of heavy information. This is not, you know, it's not just, oh, you spit it on and it's easy. No, this is a whole entree. You got to take a minute to, to work your way around the plate.
So look, the reason I bring up the example of pronouns and transgender students, I grew up in a time when nobody talked about that at all.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a time when if anybody said anything, it was not, the language was awful.
Awful.
So that's in me because I grew up in that. That's part of my socialization. So I have to work that.
Yes.
I have to address myself so that I can connect to my own students. And I've learned to do so. And of course, they've helped me. Sometimes I miss on the pronouns and so on, and they go, okay, Dr. Nacoste.
Yep.
Okay. You're right, I'm sorry.
Right.
One of the things I keep working on is you guys.
Same. You all.
It's you all. You folks. Something.
Something other than that.
Something other than that.
Absolutely right. And that kind of hit up on the...
No, not you people. Not
you people.
No, not you people. No.
That might get us into another area.
That's a different problem.
So, when we're talking about mental health, what are some mental health challenges that come with being from a student from an oppressed group? Thinking of students of color, students with mental or physical disabilities, LGBTQIA+, students from lower SES backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, and how can we appropriately advocate and support those students?
Very interesting. So right now in particular, it's always been there, but right now in particular, given all the things that have just happened around bigotry and racism, wow. Our students, their cognitive systems are on fire, and they're looking for emotional support, even sometimes not even realizing they are. And they got to get some of that from each other, but they really want something from people who represent the institution. So what does that mean? How do you be an ally? Turns out the first starting point is listening, because you don't know. You don't know exactly what they're, if you assume you know what they're feeling, you're going to get in trouble. If you assume everybody is having the same kind of approach to the situation, you're going to get in trouble. So student comes to you, what we have to teach people to do is learn how to listen, as opposed to saying, because people do this, oh God, you walk into the room, you sit down, they know you're a Black person, and they go, oh, you all right? I'm fine. Damn it. I was. So you got to learn to listen and see what people want to, is back to some of my points, want to reveal to you. Go slow. And we have to train people to do that. There are a lot of well-meaning people. Don't misunderstand me. People with really good intentions, but the saying about good intentions, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Absolutely.
People need training. People need at least some guidance about how to have these kinds of interactions, particularly in times that are as hot as this time is.
Yes, absolutely right. And, that brings me right on to the next question that I had. And I think we highlighted it, but I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that COVID-19 paired with what we're seeing, like you said, it's a hot time. It's really, it feels inflammatory, that almost everything is ouchy. That's how I like to explain it. Everything is ouchy. Yes, a little ouchy right now. And so, I think just having a moment to acknowledge, no matter what the background of the student is, recognizing the immense amount of stress and pressure that is on right now, just by being back to school and having to perform academically, but also having this other side of, there's a lot of stuff going on.
So here you go. One of the things that we all have to understand from these positions of power that we sit in is that students are looking at us as more than just professors, staff members. They're looking at us as human beings. So what we have to model for them is our disturbance.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to say, oh, this is hard.
Yeah.
Because that lets them breathe. I have an example. I've been doing these for my students, what I call dispatches, voice essays, 5-minute talks that I send to them via email about some topic. Since I have to do this Zoom stuff, I decided I'd use my voice another way. And I sent one last week where I said, pandemic life is hard. And I talked about the sudden shift on the campus. I talked about the fact that just as people are starting to get settled in, everybody has to go home. I talked about, okay, I got it. And then in the bigger world, something happens, a hero dies, the Black Panther dies. Oh my God, what is happening to the world? And I said, I have been feeling all that myself. You are not alone.
Mm-hmm.
That day I got an email from a student
Mm.
to thank me for reminding her that she's not alone in having all of these feelings.
Yeah.
So it's very important that we admit that we are also struggling.
Yes.
When we have a student in our office talking about this. Don't try to be on the high horse, try above it all. That's awful. That is awful.
Absolutely right. Now I'm going to take a question that came through in the chat pod. So we're trying to wrap our head around this word neodiversity. What is the new aspect? Is it that our society is more diverse now, or is it that we're becoming newly aware that people are diverse around us?
Oh, interesting. Very good. Both.
This came from Mark.
Okay.
Mark Ambrose. Yes.
Okay. It's actually both. So I'm old. I grew up in the Jim Crow South.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched our nation change. I grew up in the Jim Crow South, joined the Navy, watched the Navy struggle with this mightily, race rise to board ships carrying weapons of mass destruction, desegregation, to starting to talk about that's desegregation and race relations, starting to talk about diversity, where we talked about, women, okay. And then a mix of groups suddenly are being pushed through immigration and various other forces. So suddenly, and it seemed sudden, even though it was transitional, it seems sudden, like all of a sudden there are a lot of these different people around. What is going on? So it's a combination. There are a lot of these different people around. They've been around, but now suddenly Americans were aware of it.
Yeah.
And having to deal with it. Desegregation did this really important thing, really important and awful thing. It made it clear who was a we and who was a they. The we's could go where the they's could not. That's all gone. Everybody at NC State is Wolfpack. Everybody. Even though in the past, women couldn't go to school here, Blacks and Latinx people couldn't go to school here. Okay. But that's not true anymore. So you walk in my classroom, yikes. And then the professors, oh no. Okay. That's the neo. The neo is all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just diversity anymore. And it's not just categories of people, it's interactions. Neodiversity describes an interpersonal situation that we all are in, where we all have to interact with each other, with people not like us on some dimension.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, thank you for providing that clarity and also that conversation around just, it's been here, it's always been here. Now our awareness is here, and now it's part of conversations that we can't avoid. It's here. Yeah. There's no shutting the door on that and going back to our little safe zone. That zone is for everyone now.
There is no safe zone.
Absolutely right. We've got to confront this stuff.
That's
so
right.
Let's see. We've got just about 5 minutes left. So how about we round it off with one question that I think all of us would like to kind of know about and how we can move forward is, what is one step that we could all take today to become more comfortable with communicating with other language groups, with people outside of our immediate circle? What's your best piece of advice for having these conversations and really navigating that?
It's actually that first principle. Never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. Breathe. Look at that person as a person. You're interacting with a person.
Yes.
And then see what topics come up.
Yeah. Never
try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. That student in your office is not a Black student. That student in your office is a student who may want to express and talk about their Blackness. But don't you start it.
Yeah.
Never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group.
Absolutely. So having that conversation and allowing this space for, like you said, the onion, as they reveal, I'm here, I'm hearing, I'm listening, I'm going to be a part, I'm going to engage in this conversation. I'm going to create this space, this community space.
That's what you do.
Space. Absolutely.
That's what you do.
So let's grab one more bonus question. So in your perspective, what does your ideal future look like in regards to mental health and community well-being at NC State's campus?
Ooh. Wow. Ooh. That's kind of big. But
Like, how much time do we have?
Ideal. Uh, Look, when I got here in 1988, there was no Disability Resources Office. It didn't exist. There was no LGBTQ center. There was a fledgling, nope, there was no Women's Center. There was a fledgling African American center. My ideal is where those places become integral parts of the life of the campus, not sitting off by themselves. But everybody walks in and out. Everybody feels like that this is part of Wolfpack. That would mean the community is fully connected to each other. Fully. That would be my idea.
Yeah, and fully respecting one another too.
Exactly.
That this space existing doesn't take away from any other spaces that I might be connected with or I might find valuable. It just means that that's a space for people who identify in that way or who need support in that way that maybe I can't provide, that I shouldn't provide because that's not my group. However, I can be an ally, like we said, that those points about allyship and really being able to respect the diversity that is NC State now and will continue to be NC State in the years coming.
Yes, indeed.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So let's see. I'm going to scan the chat really quick to see if we got anything new that came through. There's a lot, so I'm trying to keep up. Let's see. So we've got a question here that is about the anxiety piece. So
okay.
Yeah, so to live with anxiety, can you speak on that a little bit more about what that really means and how do you walk with that?
Oh, yeah. Sure. So anxiety is this really creepy thing. I mean, you feel it in your stomach. But the truth is, the most important thing is to say to yourself, "Ooh, I feel it in my stomach." And then say, and ask yourself, why? And try to process that. If not in the exact moment, because you got to interact with people, try to stay away from it so you can interact. But then later on, you got to process that. That's the self-examination part. Somebody just asked me to do the 5 points I made. So I'm going to do that to end.
Yes.
1, never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. Never try to interact with a person as a representative of I can send this in a document, by the way. 2, go slow. Go slow. Self-disclosure should come slowly as if peeling an onion. 3, live with the anxiety. Live with the anxiety. 4, agree to disagree. Agree to disagree without trying to be competitive. And 5, have learning conversations. Have learning conversations.
Absolutely right. So what a great way to send us off. I'm going to share screen just one last time so we can capture some of the most important parts, which is, how do we find your book? What's the best way to find your book, to purchase your book? Where can we go to do that?
Okay, Quail Ridge Books in town has it.
Okay.
Of course, Amazon. If you're sick of Amazon, though, you can go directly to my publisher, Apprentice House Press. So, Quail Ridge Books, Apprentice House Press. Just do apprenticehousepress.com, and you'll find my book there.
Perfect. And I will, for everybody that's on the call, I will be sure to link those things in the follow-up email. I know it's hard to keep up with the chat, but we also had some wonderful folks who mentioned where they can buy it. If you want to try to do local, to support local, there's opportunities to do so. And then the last things that we'll say is that I've got some new things that are coming up that I'll send out in a follow-up email, but know that we've got our Healthy Living series that will be coming up soon. And then our Step 2 at Walking Challenge, you need to register by September 18th. What a great way to build that community well-being, come together as a group, get your move on. And then we've got our feedback form here. So I'm trying to be fancy smanchy and do a QR code. So you all test test it out and see how it works. You probably will have to log into your Gmail accounts if it's not already up there, but I'd love to know what you all think, what your thoughts are and your perspectives. And one final time, give a big round of applause. You can use your reaction emoji there. A big round of applause for Dr. Nacoste for taking the time out to talk with us today. And we'll be sending that follow-up email that lists the 5 points along with where you can purchase the book. And if you all have any other questions, you know how to reach me, ajstep2@ncsu.edu. And until next time, we will see you next time.
Take care. Bye-bye now.
All right. Take care. All right. Bye.